I've been presenting to you the contrast between Pride and Prejudice as a contrast of two different kinds of rhythm, the cold sluggishness of tradition, the pride that doesn't need to speak for itself, implicit, the gravity, um, the awfulness of Darcy's body, his estate, his home, um, versus the um, new speed of commerce, of faster forms of circulation, transportation, communication that come with modernity. Um, and the that speed prejudice is correlated with speed right from the beginning when we see how quickly the um, judgment of the crowd flips on Darcy. They think he's great, then they think he's a creep. um, that prejudicial prejudice it is correlated with that speed of judgment. Um, so now I want to get into thinking about Lizzie's voice in relationship to the narrator, and how I want to suggest that she combines these two, that the story is about a kind of reconciliation of this contrast of speeds. Um, and uh, After all, we're reading, this is a novel, this is a Austen is inventing a new form of communication. She's a highly sophisticated writer, highly ironic and witty. She's not like Edmund Burke. Um, Edmund Burke is a very sophisticated writer as well, but she's not siding unequivocally with tradition and disparaging the new speed of modernity um, as one-sidedly as Burke does. She is trying to find a new way of circulating in the form of her novels, in the form of her unique new style of narrative, in appreciation for the implicit prestige of tradition, kind of reverence that doesn't need to speak for itself, that resists prejudicial chatter. Um, so I want to suggest that Wordsworth has something to tell us and is a significant influence. The way Austen's narrative works and the way Lizzie's um, prestige or body language, we um, come to appreciate a new gravity of the body, um, through Lizzie's experience of embarrassment, shame, um, love, and joy. Um, and as above all, irony, the kind of complexity that we saw in, she dwelt among the untrodden ways, or I wandered lonely as a cloud, or these tensions that get worked out poetically in Wordsworth, for the sake of a new, communicating a new appreciation for bodies, for shame, what it means to be this neglected Lucy, this individual, um, is it's worked out almost musically through these paradoxical metaphors. So let's look at some Wordsworthian features correlated with Lizzie. So first of all is a suspicion of literature. So we talked already about the commodification of literature. literature as a ornament, furniture instead of a means of communication. Um, Lizzie expresses a similar suspicion of traditional poetry, and that's very important to keep in mind for when we think about these people, Austen and Wordsworth. It's so easy to forget because they're so canonical to us now how radical they were in the day, and overturning um, the conventional conception of literature. Um, so here we see Lizzie just totally mocking, talking about the efficacy of poetry in driving away love. Um, I thought poetry was the food of love, said Darcy. Of a fine, stout, healthy love it may. Everything nourishes what is strong already, but if it's only a slight, thin sort of inclination, I'm convinced that one good sonnet will starve it entirely away. Um, Very funny, and but also very sharp. Like she's making a point that we're confusing like the um, accident for the substance, seeing causality with correlation. Um, Everything nourishes what is strong already. Um, that's consistent with the sophisticated kind of systemic social thinking and intelligence that Austen is always probing. I mean, it really, and the poetry, it's like, it's this idea of the idealization of love as a cause, um, this poetization of love as a cause, um, is something that Austen probes critically in her novels. Um, so another really maybe the most kind of prominent Wordsworthian feature is the Lizzie's fondness for rambles in nature, idling, wandering in the name of empathy. Her concern for Jane when she falls ill leads her on this walk through the woods that she's walk through the countryside and she's mocked um, in terms that Wordsworth was mocked for. This, you're exhibiting a kind of rustic peasant um, vulgarity um, that is an indifference to decorum. So on the one hand, it's like her rejection of poetry. It's a conventional poetry. It's a offense against convention. But on the other hand, for those who have eyes to see, who are willing to look beyond convention, there's a new kind of aesthetic charm. Miss Bingley, who's jealous of Darcy's appreciation of Lizzie's unconventional beauty, um, says, "Ha! She's gone too far here and getting all her petticoats all muddy. I'm afraid that this adventure has rather affected your admiration of her fine eyes." But no, not at all. They were brightened by the exercise. A short pause followed this speech, leaving us dumbfounded, like speechless, the way a Wordsworth poem does. Um, uh, so the unconventional, the surprising exposure of something dirty, um, reveals actually a deeper beauty, brightened. What all Miss Bingley sees is the mud. He sees something that's brightened. That's really a good way of looking at Wordsworth's poems. It seems like, oh, you're not using Wordsworth doesn't use the aesthetic refinement of prior poems. They're so crude and rustic and simple. But this, if you're uh, uh, willing to look past the unconventionality, you'll see a more refined experience of emotional intelligence, empathy, um, but complex kind of feeling for Simon Lee, the old man traveling, um, as well as music. Um, BBC miniseries, the 1995 version of Pride and Prejudice, is really great, as I've said, and just want to show you the beginning of the introductory credits to the first episode, um, and ask you to think about the different rhythms that are evoked. It begins with this image of knitting. We see Elizabeth knitting in the novel. The and Yeah, we see the scene of Bingley choosing to buy his um, estate on a whim, and then we see Lizzie looking at him and Darcy, and then sort of rambling, skipping, picking flowers through the countryside.
Pretty enough, I grant you. It's nothing to Pemberley, I know. But I must settle somewhere. Have I your approval?
You'll find the society something savage.
Country manners? I think they're charming.
Then you better take it.
Thank you. I shall. I shall close with the attorney directly.
So I think that's very sharp, juxtaposition of different social attitudes in correlation with different rhythms, interaction with the land, money, and aesthetic um, uh, modes of aesthetic appreciation. Just sort of, it's a fair prospect. I'll take it. Um, versus this rambling, interactive. I love how she's walking down the lane, doesn't know where she's going. She turns around, skips, um, uh, the, finds, cultivates this key romantic term. You cultivate your garden. It's an interactive rhythm, interactive with the environment. That's about paying close attention to details, not objectifying, commodifying, but seeing like the violet half hidden from the eye, um, engaging in a complex way with the forms of the environment, rather than parceling it out, getting and spending. There's another detail there that's very weird, but also I think very sharp and true to Austen. Um, See them. You see them riding away. They're so small, and then we see Lizzie's head. It's like giant, God's eye view towering over these little horsemen. They look like little play figures, and she's this giant. And I think that's true to Lizzie. Figure of Lizzie in the novel becomes, correlated with the omniscient narrator by the end of the novel. Her perspective ultimately comes to define the reality of the novel, and thereby the power of literature, authority over social reality. And so that's what's novel. I mean, the word novel it's importantly means new, modern. Modern means new. Wordsworthy, an aspect I'd emphasize about Lizzie has to do with the rhythms of mind that Wordsworth talks about, the habits of mind, that there's a kind of rhythmic, musical patterning to our thinking, that we're not simply godlike, objective observers on the world, but that thinking has a rhythm in particular of recollection, that the way in I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, that inward eye that recalls the past, rewrites ourselves, who we are, as a process of our own self-remembering, self-rewriting. This is an active kind of selfhood that's being described. So that's again, that sounds very unlike Burke. Burke's about inaction, the power of inertia, that's embedded, implicit in the land. Whereas what I'm suggesting is Austen's really emphasizing the power of perpetual recreation, that's very modern. We see this articulated in a very profound passage late in the novel. It's so beautifully written. So this correlation of Lizzie's insight with anonymous patterns of mind that preceded her. She found, or what has been sometimes found before, that an event to which she had looked forward with impatient desire did not, in taking place, bring all the satisfaction she had promised herself. So she's seeing through that consumerist fantasy of getting and spending, that this impatient desire, it's always disappointed. And so she's seeing through to a deeper pattern of experience. So it's consequently necessary to name some other period for the commencement of actual felicity, to have some other point on which her wishes and hopes might be fixed, and by again enjoying the pleasure of anticipation, console herself for the present and prepare for another disappointment. So recognizing, like Wordsworth, that the point of desire and imagination isn't acquisition, but the framing of our experience in the world, like seeing the violet half hidden, seeing the patterning of the daffodils. It's not about, again, acquiring, achieving, but finding a kind of resonance in relationships, interaction with the environment. She punctures his complacency. She's not as awed by him as others are. Just as she's, skeptical of the conventional power of poetry, she has more skepticism than others of the conventional prestige of aristocracy, and her wit outmatches that prestige and throws Darcy a curveball, and that he finds extremely intriguing and dangerous, because for his own sake, he's threatened by her lower class status. He doesn't want to be appealed by her. Maybe I should just say that that's a big part of Darcy's character, is that he's been burned in the past. His family has been burned by Wickham. That Wick, the sparks, or he bears flame like the wick of a candle. He burns the Darcy family by seducing his sister, and he seduces both Lizzie and Lydia. Hence, that's the backstory to Darcy's cold aloofness and pride. Is he's been burned by the interaction of the upper and lower classes, and so that somewhat explains his excessive pride, that it's informed by the jeopardy that it put his sister in, as well as the the humiliation that it subjected Darcy himself to. So that's all. We don't know it at this point so early in the novel, but that's all behind his conception of the danger of falling for Lizzie. But what puts him in that danger? Why is he tempted, allured by her? It's again her not just her skepticism about his aristocratic entitlement, but her cleverness, her wit, um, engages him. He's drawn into it in an erotic way. Um, the power of her mind and their banter, their flirtatious banter. Um, so again, that's a rhythm of language, of interaction that is correlated with dancing. So here he thinks he's mocking her, and she turns the tables on him. Um, and it has to do with dancing. Um, he he's like, shouldn't you want to be dancing? And she feels she resists his attempt to pigeonhole her, and uh, turns the tables on him again she's not replying to him. Like, he's usually the one that doesn't reply. She is refusing to apply to him, and that he's like, that's my move. He repeated the question with some surprise at her silence. "Oh," said she, "I heard you before, but I could not immediately determine what to say in reply." That her disarming openness is another kind of curveball. Like, to just come right out and say, I didn't know what to say. You wanted me, I know, to say yes, that you might have the pleasure of despising my taste, but I always delight in overthrowing those kinds of schemes, in cheating a person of their premeditated contempt. So she flips from this silence to, like, I'm already like 2 steps ahead of you, thinking of, I'm delighting in overthrowing your premeditated contempt. I have therefore made up my mind to tell you that I do not want to dance real at all. Now despise me if you dare. Indeed, I do not dare. He kind of follows her lead. Again, there's a kind of dance. He follows her lead with this unexpected openness. That he's effectively saying, "Whoa, I am, struck by you," and she's in turn struck by him. Elizabeth, having rather expected to affront him, was amazed at his gallantry. But there was a mixture of sweetness and archness in her manner, which made it difficult for her to affront anybody. And Darcy had never been so bewitched by any woman as he was by her. He really believed that were it not for the inferiority of her connections, he should be in some danger. Think about the free and direct discourse here. What exactly is the perspective from which this is narrated? Is it merely an omniscient narrator telling us in the third person that Darcy believed if it weren't for the inferiority of her connections, he'd be in danger? It sounds a little more like the narrator is quoting Darcy's self-talk. He's telling himself he believes that if it weren't for the inferiority of her connections, he'd be in danger. He's trying to talk himself out of being in danger. He's worried about being in danger, so he's telling himself he's not in danger. That's it. It's a typical irony for Jane Austen, but it's also a typical irony of language, that of explicit language, that what we say, we're often is an alibi or like a disavowal of what we're really concerned about. Um, so again, the importance of the implicit, of body language, the awful object of the silent, what goes unspoken in the interaction of bodies. Um, that's what's this is about. Is this unspoken dynamic between these two bodies, and what their language is more like a symptom of this interaction than a transparent window on these two characters' actual feelings. Lizzie is seducing or tempting Darcy here, undermining his control as the aristocratic center of gravity of social authority in the situation. She is that it's not just about Darcy. It's that authority, Lizzie's authority, the gravitational force of Lizzie's authority is felt in the larger social scene, especially the Miss Bingleys. And I talked, initially in that first scene of the ball, Lizzie's identification or correlation with the narrator, the omniscient narrator of the novel, is suggested through the way she overhears Darcy's conversation. So eavesdropping, overhearing, that's a motif that's correlated with the narration. What it means to be the narrator has to do with overhearing. And in this scene, so as Miss Bingley's getting jealous of the evident power that Lizzie has over Darcy, gets expressed in the scene that later in chapter 10. So she's mocking Darcy, and saying, "Oh, you guys are going to get married. You'll really enjoy hanging out with Mrs. Bennet." Longbourn, the Austen's place names are always really evocative. Netherfield is the place where the aristocratic sinks down into the lower classes. Longbourn is where life is born, very long, very boring, among the Bennet's chatter. So I hope you'll give your mother-in-law a few hints when this desirable event takes place as to the advantage of holding her tongue, and if you can compass it, do cure the younger girls of running after officers. So she's rubbing Darcy's nose in the humiliation of his attraction to a lower class person like Lizzie. Darcy brushes her off. What painter could do justice to Elizabeth's beautiful eyes? And he's, again, with this disarming openness, he's like, it wouldn't be easy, you're right, to catch their expression. But their color and shape and the eyelashes, so remarkably fine, might be copied. At that moment, they were met from another walk by Miss Hurst and Elizabeth herself. I did not know that you intended to walk, said Miss Bingley, in some confusion, lest they had been overheard. So that fear of being overheard, she's worried about Elizabeth overhearing her. Even as she's mocking Elizabeth, she has a sense of her social authority. So Um, then, taking the disengaged arm of Mr. Darcy, she left Elizabeth to walk by herself the past just admitted 3. So, in this childlike way, Miss Bingley tries to kind of shove Elizabeth out. Mr. Darcy felt the rudeness and immediately said, "This walk is not wide enough for a party. We'd better go into the avenue." It's a scene that's really playing out, this class divide, class tension. And Darcy's trying to. Darcy's being forced to choose sides. But Elizabeth kind of stands above the conflict and indeed mocks them, and it says, "No, you have your walk," and she pigeonholes them. She by characterizing the group as picturesque. So again, she's in the position of the narrator or the designer, the author of the scene, saying, "Oh no, you make a picturesque scene, you go ahead." Elizabeth, who had not the least inclination to remain with them, laughingly answered, "No, no, stay where you are. You are charmingly grouped, and appear to uncommon advantage. The picturesque would be spoiled by admitting a 4th. Goodbye." She ran gaily off, rejoicing as she rambled about, in the hope of being at home again in a day or 2. Jane was already so much recovered as to intend leaving her room for a couple of hours that evening. Not only is it a kind of triumph here for Lizzie's narrative authority, her view, and defining the story, what's happening here, objectifying the others in this charming picture, narrating the scene. Her narration is correlated with this Wordsworthian rambling and counting, the day or 2, a couple of hours. Time is on her side. There's a temporal rhythm. They've been fixed in her story. She's rambling free. On that idea that time is on Lizzie's side, here's another scene in chapter 11 of the kind of flirtatious banter between Elizabeth and Darcy, where he's drawn into her rhythm, a rhythm of interrogation, and he likes it. He likes the power of her mind and the dance of their back and forth. And Miss Bingley does not like it. The scene ends with Miss Bingley calling for music, tired of a conversation in which she had no share. The music of this flirtation is replaced by actual music. And it's interesting, again, this free and direct discourse, then the reference to danger. So the pianoforte was opened, and Darcy, after a few moments' recollection, was not sorry for it. He began to feel the danger of paying Elizabeth too much attention. We see the conflict. Notice the way in which the motif of dance is getting refined in different ways. Now music is like a relief from this erotic banter, the power of that. So the next sort of act in a section of the novel is um, it asserts a countervailing power of patriarchy, the putting down the hammer on Lizzie's disruptive intervention. Um, and in this way, there's an interesting and underappreciated, I think, correlation between Darcy and Mr. Collins in their um, what it is referred to as adhering to the book, the letter of the law of patriarchy, of entitlement, the entitlement of men, the entitlement of aristocracy, the entitlement of the ensign, the entailment, entailing the Longbourn estate to the male cousin, Mr. Collins, over before the female daughters. So we see this power of the book. It's indicated in various ways. We already talked about Lizzie's mocking, and Austen's mocking of conventional literatures like furniture and pointless ornamentation of poetry. And here we see Darcy kind of exercising the blunt, coercive power of the book, exercising passive aggressivity, adhering conscientiously to his book, and he would not even look at her. I want to look at other ways in which the sort of power of what's called the logos, the language, the explicit text that's correlated with the law, is a power that's vested in principally in men, of a certain class in this novel. Now, one of the most striking scenes in this novel that many of you have already mentioned is Mr. Collins's proposal to Lizzie. There's something, extremely violent about this. I mean, it's not very well disguised. He is reading no as yes. Lizzie is scared of the situation before it even starts. She doesn't want to be left alone with this guy. I beg you not to go, she says to her mom. And she's abandoned by her own mother to this guy, even as she's pleading for her not to leave. And like, trapped prey, she calculates that it's wisest to get it over as soon and quietly as possible. It's really chilling. And, right from the beginning, Mr. Collins indicates his attitude of taking her resistance as an invitation. You'd be less amiable in my eyes had there not been this unwillingness. She objects. You're too hasty. You forget I've made no answer. You've forgotten that this is supposed to be a conversation. And he again replies, I'm not now to learn that it's usual with young ladies to reject the addresses of the man whom they secretly mean to accept. I'm therefore by no means discouraged, and I hope to lead you to the altar ere long. And this scene really climaxes in a question of whether I'm just, a body or whether my voice matters. Uh, Pay me the compliment of believing what I say. Collins's uh, condescension just amplifies. I'm far from accusing you of cruelty, because I'm willing to forgive it. I understand that you are just that no means yes, but understand there's a limit. And he comes right out and says why she isn't to be believed. Um, my reasons are briefly these. It does not appear to me that my hand is unworthy of your acceptance, or that the establishment I offer would be any other than highly desirable. My situation, connections, taken into further consideration. Certainly, it's by no means certain that any other marriage may ever be made to you. Your portion is unhappily so small. Just conclude that you are not serious in your rejection of me. So he's really saying you don't have a right to speak. Like I'm really entitled to you. Her response again, like, pay me the compliment of believing, hearing what I'm saying. It, consider me a rational creature speaking truth from the heart. These words are, I think, particularly powerful. Creature speaking truth from the heart makes me think of Frankenstein's creature, like Austen's pressing the minimal terms, like, do you accept that this is another that this body has a reason and heart of its own. Speaking truth from the heart, it's really correlating the body, the truth of the body, the truth is embodied, is met again with Collins's condescension. He takes her resistance as just more invitation. You're uniformly charming. So this is a very chilling scene, but what Austen made even more chilling underscores that there's nothing uniquely villainous about Collins, that this is a systemic violence that has to do with patriarchal language. Who has the right to speak and silence other bodies, to define other bodies as objects of consumption. This passage, it's preceded by a characterization of Collins as really innocuous, really normative. He's a function of his circumstances. He's a product of class, education, a confluence of anonymous social conditions led to who he is. So his behavior is an anonymous feature of systemic feature of social reality, rather than anything particularly monstrous. Although this scene cannot be read otherwise than as monstrous. it's underscored, again, if you correlate it with these earlier passages, maybe the monstrosity of it becomes even more apparent. And I think the first introduction of Mr. Collins is predatory, from the beginning. The girls were not the only objects of Mr. Collins' admiration. The hall, the dining room, all its furniture were examined and praised. His commendation of everything would have touched Mrs. Bennet's heart, but for the mortifying supposition of his viewing it all as his own future property. The dinner, too, in its turn, was highly admired, and he begged to know which of his fair cousins the excellency of its cooking was owning. So he's consuming all, not just Elizabeth, but the whole household.